Our guest today is Marc Verville. Marc lives in Santa Monica. He's Santa Monica native, and he's a frequent contributor to local publications focused on state and local government financial management, land use, and RENA issues. He's a member of the Santa Monica Audit Subcommittee and currently is chair. Marc is a regular contributor to the California Alliance of Local Electeds with his analyses and studies and presentations and comments. He's seen as a major asset by the California Alliance of Local Electeds. His educational background includes an MBA from UCLA, and he's a California CPA. With that, I'll turn it over to Marc. If you'd like to expand any on your bio, go ahead, and then proceed with presentation. It's all yours, Marc.
Rick, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for the generous invite to speak to the group. My business background primarily was in operating finance for the entertainment business, which included or was dominated by doing business planning. And that's all about connecting the dots from a bunch of disparate data points. And that's kind of what the perspective I've brought to how we look at RENA, how we look at what's happening in state and local policy. So with that, I think we'll get started. The presentation is a little bit more ambitious than what I had initially proposed, which was just looking at the Department of Finance population projections that had been updated in July, this July, 19th of 2023. It's an update on the prior population projections from the DOF that were July 19th of 2021. So it's basically a 2-year update. But I'm integrating it with a bit more context within RENA, and hopefully that'll help people kind of put the pieces together. So with that, I'm going to launch this. So I guess I'm going to share screen. Is that right, Rick?
Yes.
So what are you seeing now?
I'm seeing like a PowerPoint that has the slide that you're focused on, which is Livable, California, and then I see your other slides down the left.
Is that what you're seeing right now? Do you see full screen?
You're showing the presenter's projection. I think you just want to do slideshow rather than presenter's view.
Yeah, the way you had it just before your last change is good. There we go.
What do you see now? Do you see the what do you see now? Do you see the
Well, we see all of the slides on the left-hand side.
Okay, I think we're going to be stuck with this presentation.
So if you click on slideshow, it gives you what you were just showing before.
But this is, yeah, I think this is probably better.
Okay. No, go to slideshow and then start from beginning. And you'll get
well, you know what, the issue is I've been having problems with the app, with the Zoom app, and I think it's locked on to where we're at now. So I don't think we're going to be able to get any better than this, unfortunately.
Fire away.
So anyways, let's I don't want to spin wheels on my technical inabilities here. So please work with me on this and we'll go forward. So basically, this is, as I said, I'm going to be a little bit more ambitious than just population projections. I'm going to try and pull this together with RENA. So standing back a second, RENA unit determination is based on two things, and that's not always apparent in anything that is being discussed across the state discussion about this, or even the local discussions. I actually downloaded all of the SCAG, since I'm in Santa Monica, the SCAG models that lock into and determine the allocations to each city in SCAG. And this is how SCAG is built, and this is how, in general, the state of California is built, with each Council of Governments, SCAG is one of the largest in the state, using this breakdown. So a lot of what I'll be showing you, the numbers I have are for SCAG, but the concepts apply throughout the state. So what we're seeing, hopefully you guys are seeing a slide that says total arena units. Is that correct?
Well, it's a total arena units and existing and projected.
Okay, very good. Okay, so existing needs, so the arena units are based upon need. And the way the arena process has evolved in the sixth cycle, which is different from the fifth cycle, and it was solidified with all that legislation between 2016 and 2023, is existing need and projected need together is what drives total arena units. They are very different, and they are exceedingly flexible, especially when you're the person entering them into the spreadsheet. Existing need dominates in Southern California. Existing need dominates the RENA unit determination. So, for example, 62% of all the SCAG units are justified under existing need. 71% of the city of Los Angeles's units are justified under existing need, and 87% of Santa Monica's units are justified under existing need. Projected need is obviously the remainder, and so when we start talking about the Department of Finance population projections, we are looking at the projected needs section, not the existing needs section. And that's the get out of jail free card for HCD, SCAG, and all the rest of these councils of government. So it's very, very important to keep that in mind, that we're looking at less than half of the units. In SCAG, for example, it's less than 40% of the units. In Santa Monica, it's about 10% of the units. So we'll also address near the end of the presentation the existing needs section. But this is extraordinary in the city of Los Angeles. When I'm assisting United Neighbors in their interactions with Los Angeles's planning department, they basically said, well, you know, the projected need is gone because LA is doing nothing but shrinking. The planning department immediately came back and said, au contraire, existing need is what we're basing everything on. So we're going to go through this, but it's critical to keep this in mind. So we're going to be looking at the state of California. So now we're into projected need, the population projection. So we're going to be looking at state of California, the Northern California, which is ABAG. We're going to take a quick detour into San Francisco. We're going to look at SCAG, which is Southern California, and Los Angeles County. Before we get into all of these, I just want to back up a second and look at the macro picture facing California. So basically, immigration to California has really been driven by, especially in Northern California, has been driven by the tech sector. And that immigration has been at a very high socioeconomic level. That said, interest rate increases and the established tech company downsizing have fueled an unprecedented brake on that sector's expansion and employment. Remote work and work from home has further dampened the necessity for in-migration. Capital availability, basically with high interest rates, capital is becoming much more expensive. Startups are desperately reliant upon cheap capital. So it's putting a brake on startup activity. Supply chain realignment with China is reducing port volumes into Los Angeles and Northern California. And the beneficiaries are the East Coast ports and the Gulf of Mexico ports. And finally, interstate competition for business, the normal kind of business startup, is unprecedented vis-a-vis California. And so basically you've got aggressive use of tax policy and a very affordable cost of living, having companies locate their operations in states other than California. If you look at all for example, if you look at all the battery startups that are being funded by the federal government's programs, none of them are in California. So let's take a look at California state. So these are the the Association of Governments, and that's how kind of this is how RENA is structured. So I'm following the RENA structure here. You can see that California in 2020 had a total population of 39,500,000. In 2060, it's projected to be 39,500,000. So it's basically flat. And the biggest decliner that you see here is Southern California at 1.5 million decline over that 40-year period, with the other areas supposedly making up the difference. We're going to take a look at that. Now, as we go through the state of California, the format of these slides is templated for each of the areas. So once we get comfortable with looking at California for the different views of California, those same views are going to be replicated for each of the other areas. So just to help everyone kind of keep everything in perspective. So looking at California, you can see that the solid black line is the new forecast. The dotted black line is the forecast from 2 years ago. So basically, California has dropped by 10.6% in 2060 in the forecast update, and it's dropped by 6% in 2029, which is the end of the 6-cycle RENA. And as you can see, the ending population for California is going to be roughly where it was in 2017. So for the first time in California's history, it's basically, they're saying it's flat with just a little bit of growth in between. But as we get into this, you'll see that it takes some heroic assumptions to generate even this outcome. So this slide is, again, the overall state of California, but this is the year-on-year change in the state of California. The solid colored bars on the left are actuals or estimate of actuals, and the pattern bars on the right are basically the projection period. And as you can see, the projection period is recovering from the trends of the actual period. And then it goes into a slight increase, as we saw with the prior slide. And then it goes into, not to be too dramatic about it, but terminal decline. So what are the factors driving these changes? So what we can see here is the blue line is the natural births minus deaths in the state, and the orange line is migration. So you can see that the major issue here was a massive drop-off in migration, and this is net migration. So this is both a reduction in people coming into the state and net outflows from the state. And as you can see in the projection period, the migration miraculously recovers and then flatlines at a steady increase from around 2030 to 2060. The natural factors, births minus deaths, show that the state is aging, and basically after 2037 is a net negative on the demographics of the state. So this is migration by itself. As you can see, what the actuals showed a pretty dire change, going down to about 235,000 decline. And then in the projection period, it immediately starts improving. And then by the time you hit around 2028, migration goes back into positive territory, and then it basically flatlines at around 2/3 of what it was in the prior projection. So what this says is migration returns, but there's no actual drivers that have been stated as to what supports that assumption. If tech is not expanding at the pace it historically has expanded, and you've got an increasing competition for new businesses outside of the state, this kind of profile is extraordinarily aggressive. So the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce came out with an analysis in 2023, and they said that the key points out of their analysis, which was a bit of a wake-up call, was that the net migration into California became negative starting in 2020, when the declining trend of in-migration, which started in 2015, converged with out-migration that began after 2012. So basically, these trends have been going on for quite some time. And they said that, while some of the explanation is simply the result of a decrease in international migration, which is also has been of highly compensated individuals, especially in the tech sector, and from enhanced border controls, that cannot explain the increase in the number of out migrants. And this is an economic and quality of life issue. And it says academics and policymakers have focused on taxation and regulation, affordability, and quality of life to explain the increase in out-migration. And this is the basic profile of the natural births minus deaths in the state. And you can see that basically after 2035, it's in terminal decline. What was not provided in the 2023 DOF projections, DOF being Department of Finance, is the historical look. So what I've done here is I've basically bolted on historical numbers from their prior projections to the 2023 projections. It produces, or in 2021, it produces a bit of a wobbly number, which is why you see the drop here, but that's more of a data matching exercise issue than it is any kind of actual state trend. But you can see the overall trend going down to 2035. Okay, so now we're going to go into Northern California, and so Northern California, these are the counties that basically comprise Northern California, and so Northern California is projected to increase 8% between 2020 and 2060. With a mix of declining counties and increasing counties. But what happens is that the management of the Bay Area Council of Governments is in a bit of denial. And they said, well, those Department of Finance statistics are status quo projections that don't account for future changes in public policy or investment. And he says that basically they're assuming that they're going to invest $468 billion to build and preserve adequate housing in Northern California. And $468 billion is almost 40% of the region's entire $1.2 trillion gross domestic product. And so at the state's average tax rate of 8%, it would require almost 20% of all of their annual tax revenue in each year for 27 years to actually generate a $468 billion investment. So to say that these people are really trying to grabbing at straws to basically come up with what they're justifying to keep growing their household, their development numbers is an understatement. So here's what Northern California looks like. So you can see that they dip and then they completely recover and they go into growth mode from roughly 2030 to 2060. And they're down about 7% from the prior projections. Again, you can see that the actual trends were improving in 2022, and then they start drastically improving in 2023, and then they go positive on a year-to-year basis in Northern California. You can see here that what's driving that improvement is migration assumptions, and very, very aggressive migration assumptions. So we can see here that basically the migration assumptions are so aggressive that the Northern California area actually exceeds the migration that was projected 2 years ago. It's the only area to do so. And so that's basically how that area recovers. And you can see this is a kind of a summary of the migration area. By county, the counties that lost the most population are Alameda and Contra Costa, but those are somehow the same two counties that drive all of the growth in Northern California through 2060. A possible reason for that is that the Alameda and Contra Costa housing costs are lower than all of the other areas in Northern California, but that's just a guess. And again, you can see how the natural population trends are declining after 2030, and the region starts aging quite rapidly, and so it's entirely dependent upon migration. We've heard a lot about San Francisco. San Francisco goes down about 3% according to these projections from 2020 to 2060. So basically, it looks like it kind of sort of flatlines. And the assumptions behind that, you can see that San Francisco had huge outmigration. It actually, in 2022, the estimates are that that outmigration was substantially reduced. But then they keep basically a flat line assumption for the rest of the period through 2060. You can see here that the birth minus death, again, the natural trends are negative after about 2026, and migration is the only thing that keeps the city and the county afloat. San Francisco is both a city and a county. It is the only jurisdiction in California that shares that type of structure. And you can see here on annual migration that it was significantly impacted in 2021, but then not only recovers, but stays in a recovery mode throughout almost 40 years. And here you see why that migration is necessary. This is the aging of the population in San Francisco. And the aging has been increased about a third over what was projected in the 2021 Department of Finance projections. So let's take a look at Southern California. Southern California is, as we saw before, almost half of the state, and Los Angeles County is half of Southern California. Los Angeles County takes a huge hit between 2020 and 2060, and drives the entire region negative throughout the entire period. You can see here that it went down almost 13% in 2060 from the prior projections. And here, because I have the data, we can see in 2045 that the RENA assumptions for the SCAG region were 22 million people. It has now dropped to 18 million, so it's dropped by almost 20% from the SCAG assumptions. Now, SCAG does not allow the household numbers or the unit numbers to be updated in each 8-year cycle. So SCAG and HCD are going to be enforcing unit development and construction numbers based on data that is completely outdated and as we will see, still aggressively optimistic. In 2029, the population estimates dropped from 19.7 million to 18.5. And so by the time you hit 2060, the SCAG region will be almost 4% lower than it was in 2010. And that's a 50-year period. It's the first time that's ever happened. This is what it looks like year to year overall for Southern California. So it slightly goes back to positive in the 2027 to 2034 period, and then it goes into terminal decline afterwards. What's driving that is the natural demographics that go negative in about 2028. Again, migration drastically improves, but it never gets back to positive. The combination of those two things is what drags down the entire area. And you can see here on migration that they've had to assume, even as bad as the numbers are, they've had to assume a significant improvement in migration, in the net out migration starting in 2023, and almost achieving break even in around 2032. Again, when you look at the actuals, this is very aggressive. And again, you can see the aging of the population. It goes negative in about 2028. If we look at Los Angeles County by itself, Los Angeles County takes a huge drop. Los Angeles County in 2060 drops 15% from what it was in the prior projections. In 2060, it is 6.5% lower than it was in 1990. That is unprecedented. On top of that, it's a 22%. So when you look at the year 2045, which is here, It's a 22% drop from what was assumed in the RENA assumptions that's driving all of the development that we are being exposed to. So completely unsupportable RENA numbers at this point. When you look at projected need, and we'll get back to that, that this is not existing need. When you look at 2030, it's basically a 10% drop from the RENA assumptions in 2030. I've estimated the 2030 RENA assumptions. And you can see that 2019 was a kind of a high point at 10.2 million. When we look at Los Angeles County overall, you can see the annual change. It almost hits break even in around 2029 and then continues going negative. But again, the actual negative trends are highly mitigated, which again is aggressive. This is basically the showing you the migration and natural trends both going negative. Migration is consistently negative, and the natural trends are negative from around 2034. This is migration on its own. Again, an amazing recovery, and it's about, however, 150% worse than it was in the prior projections. So as optimistic as this is, it's a huge, huge change and a downgrading from the 2021 Department of Finance projections. This is what the natural demographics look like. They go negative in around 2034. So that basically is a whirlwind trip around the state. And I thought it was really interesting to see what the media reaction to this was. And so LA Times had an article last week, and they said, well, you know what, you really shouldn't pay too much attention to this because international migration will increase, birth rate will tick up, and the state's diverse economy and natural resources will attract a fair number of workers from other states. There was absolutely no mention as to how any of this was going to happen. If the tech jobs are not happening, heavy international migration is not going to be happening. The state is becoming uncompetitive for middle-class jobs. Companies do not want to locate here because of the regulation, the taxes. So middle-class jobs are not being created here, and so the cost of living is one of the highest in the country, and the birth rate assumption is completely unsupported. So just for comparison, we've all heard how Japan is aging. And this is what the aging pyramid looks like in Japan from 1970 to 2021. And this is how, when everyone says how old Japan is, and there was I think 10% of the population is 80 and over as of last week, is something like that. This is how the progression looks when you look at aging of the population in the different years. So over 50 years, that's how it went from a younger population with a workforce to now an aging population where they're having to drastically rethink how they're going to structure society. That's just so that you can see what an aging population looks like. This is California. California is now going in the direction of Japan. That means that some magical assumption that birth rates are going to tick up is completely unfounded. So let's take a look at population projections, households, and RENA. Population is not the sole determinant of how the councils of government and HCD justify their housing requirements. They really focus on households. And so households are a function of population, but now the state's demographers here, or the HCD, is increasingly disconnecting households from the population projections to keep the narrative of the need for the aggressive housing numbers that they have alive. So the RENA housing unit determinations are driven by household projections and the population. And so the current Department of Finance household projections do not reflect the population numbers that we've just seen. They have not issued their update. So we're going to look at SCAG as a kind of a in between estimates of what as to how these groups are thinking about bridging the gap of the deteriorating population projections with their housing numbers. Now, RENA incentivizes household projections that do not follow the population projections because existing need is unrelated to population, and an existing need requires household expansion. And so, and we kind of had we saw what that was a little bit at the very beginning. And so SCAG notes, SCAG came out with in January, came out with an analysis, and they noted that households are going to increase even in a declining population environment. And it ignores the financial drivers of household density. So just to see how crazy this is, I took a look at, SCAG published a very obscure climate paper, but within it, they updated their household projections for the Southern California area. So on the left-hand side, you see what it was in 2020. And on the right-hand side, you can see what the updated projections are for the 2024 submission. And so in 2020, what I did was I took the difference between each of the reported periods, so 2016, 2035, 2045, and then calculated the persons per household using the metrics that the state provided or that SCAG provided. And so in 2020, it looks relatively reasonable, 2.9 people per household in the 2016 to 35 period, 1.45 in the 35 to 45 period, and it comes back up to 2.27. So at the end of the day, this is on the margin, and it's just it's a statistical indicator of what's happening overall in the numbers. It's a way to squeeze out how they're, where they're going with this. In order to keep the narrative alive as to increasing household projections in their revised numbers, because they had to acknowledge that the population numbers were decreasing. When you look at the 2019 to 2035 period, all of a sudden the number of people per household drops to less than 1 on the margin. It's less than 2 in the 2035 to 2050 period, and then it gets back down to 1, just over 1 in the end period. So they're having to really stretch their concept of what is driving household growth to basically justify the continuation of these extraordinarily aggressive development numbers. Now, interestingly enough, the Public Policy Institute of California published an analysis in 2022 about households and new construction. And their analysis indicated that households and new construction were perfectly aligned up until the pandemic. That basically blows apart the narrative that we've been constantly hearing, that there's been so much underdevelopment for so long in the state. And so therefore, it's only this 2-year period where all of a sudden households exceeded construction development, according to the Public Policy Institute. When I compared that to what's happening in everyone's heard of the median household price to median income ratio. And so it's the ratio of the number of years of income that it takes to buy a house. And that ratio, as I'm sure most people at Livable are aware, has been increasing over time. And so I took a look at the Southern California SCAG region, and the red bars at the top indicate the change in that number, in the number of years of income required to buy a house. The change from 2010 to 2019. That's the same period of time where the households and the construction were in sync. What this says is that the cost of housing is much more a reflection of economic factors than it is of household factors. And that's one thing that is never discussed when people are looking or pointing to the cost of housing. And these are basically single family houses. What's happening is the socioeconomic groups that are buying single-family houses are stratifying into the higher income and capital levels, and they're being attracted to the in-demand places in Southern California, and that's what's driving up the prices. Because at the end of the day, increased prices can only happen if there are people out there paying those prices. Again, these are issues that are never discussed. So let's take a look at existing need. We had a slight detour there into households and into income ratios, but let's take a look at existing need. So RHNA policy incorporates the concept of existing population housing need, separate from any population growth. And so what they do is they look at vacancy rates, they look at a concept called overcrowding, and they look at a concept called cost burdening. Now, they get the last two primarily from the American Community Survey, which is highly problematic in the accuracy of its data. And so the issues involved with this is a concept that has not been previously widely used and was really for the first time baked into state policy in the sixth cycle RHNA. And it's an extraordinarily squishy academic approach to housing, and yet it has been baked into legislative enforcement of RHNA numbers. The problems here is that it completely omits the economic nature of the determinants of household size. Vacancy rates don't distinguish between single-family and multifamily housing. Cost burdening estimates are highly inaccurate, driven by significant ACS data shortcomings. And the overstatement of overcrowding is methodological in that the definition is one person per household, and I have yet to find how they adjust for couples in a single family in a single family unit, or let's say a one-bedroom unit. That by definition, from everything I've seen, is overcrowding. And the fundamental disconnect is that it is completely divorced from basic economics. It doesn't matter how many new units you build if people are sharing rooms because they can't afford rent. And no matter, even newly constructed affordable housing is probably going to be more expensive than renting a room. And therefore, without addressing the economic issue, none of this is actually going to make any difference in any concept of overcrowding. So the bottom line is that existing need can be anything that HCD and SCAG wants it to be. And just to show how important existing need is by area in Southern California, 82% of all of the units that have been mandated for Orange County are due to existing need. 70% of all the units mandated for LA County are existing need. Together, that's 71% of the total Southern California population, completely driven by existing need, and with the issues that I've just outlined with existing need. The growth areas, as you can see, Riverside, Imperial, and San Bernardino, they have projected need, but given that, they only have less than 30% of the population. So no matter how much outmigration is happening in Los Angeles County or in Orange County, actually Orange County is projected to increase a little bit, but as we saw, Los Angeles County dominates in outmigration. The existing need completely offsets that in the narrative as to the need for additional housing. Let's take a look at some concluding thoughts. But the Public Policy Institute produced a study in 2023 that had some interesting takeaways. It says over the last few years, 53% of the state's 73 largest cities lost population, even as they added housing. Cities that are adding population are building more single-family housing, whereas singles that are losing population are building more multifamily housing in large buildings. 74% of adults with children would prefer to live in a single-family home. Multifamily developments are not family friendly and seldom available for home ownership. So if you actually want a family, you almost now have to move out of state. Finding ways to make multifamily housing more attractive to families could play a role in stemming the population losses. And then in the LA Times, there was a quote this week that said, everybody who is a renter who is middle class is aiming to be a home buyer. So all the demand is moving towards home buying, and yet everything that we see is multifamily rental housing, basically, is what you're seeing constructed. And that concludes my whirlwind tour of California and some of the issues that we've seen. And now I will.
How do I raise my hand?
Okay, thank you, Mark. That was amazing. I think everybody can sort of see why California Alliance of Local Electeds relies a lot on Mark's analyses of things like this.